Hello, everyone. It's me again. I didn't even change costumes or whatever we call that. I'm just back. If you're watching this class instead of LEA responsibilities first, my name is Shelley Halverson. I'm the Director of Special Education in 504 for the Salt Lake City School District. For those of you that do not know me yet, you will. I was thinking, like, what should I share about myself? And so I will share a few things. I've been a resource teacher and a self-contained behavior support teacher, which I thought I would hate, and I loved it. And I did that at Emerson for a decade. And then I was an assistant principal at Meadowlark, principal at Highland Park, and now I'm in the job that I'm in now. And I was going to tell you that I'm a complete goofball, which all of my colleagues that already know me can verify. And anyway, I also often make Netflix recommendations. So my recommendation this time is even better than last time, although a lot of you looked at me really doubtfully when I recommended Cheer to You. But this one is also a docu-series, but it's called Love on the Spectrum. If you're not watching it, you should be watching it. It's about young adults in England who are on the spectrum, mostly fairly mild cases of autism and Asperger's and things like that, that are trying to date and find love. And it's very sweet and tender. And so, and kind of fun to watch. So that's my recommendation this time around when you need a break from all of this stuff that we're doing and COVID and everything, and you need to just disappear into something else. That's my recommendation right now. This session is called 2020-2021 Special Ed Updates. Super creative title. So we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. I have a little PowerPoint here I'm going to walk you through. It's the special education updates, also known as riding a bike with your hair on fire, because that's kind of what special ed is like right now, in case you didn't know that already. We have a lot going on, and while everyone is very impacted by the pandemic in the education world and pretty much the whole world, our students with disabilities and the education system are in a particularly interesting place because of the requirements that we have, and because, you know, none of those requirements have been waived. So that, you know, leads to some good times that we get to have. And I'm having this issue where, oh, I can't always get my PowerPoint to forward. I recorded the other class first and had lots of problems, so hopefully I won't have as many problems this time. But this is kind of what we're going to talk about today. I want to go through just some themes in the legal updates that came out of the law conference that was last week. I don't know if anybody went. I'm guessing no, because you're not a nerd like me, but whatever. If you did, good for you. And then I want to talk about COVID and SPED and talk about some different things that we have going on. We're going to talk about just some general background and what kinds of guidance we've gotten from the feds, which is next to nothing, as you know. But there's a few things in there I wanted you to know. As I know, we are starting in an online environment, but we do have the flexibility to provide in-person services to students with disabilities, which we have been doing all summer, and it has gone very well. And so we're going to talk about what that will look like. And then we're also going to talk about, you know, you're going to get a lot of questions from parents probably about compensatory services. So I just wanted to give you some context and ways to talk about that. So let's start with our legal updates, everybody's favorite. Okay, this is a doozy. And we've just been engaged in a state complaint regarding this issue. And so it's high on the priority list, and probably now more than ever, because suddenly everyone's participating in decisions about education, but our parents of our students with disabilities are afforded that right at all times. So the few things I want you to think about as you're moving forward is parent participation has to be meaningful, which means they need to be given opportunities to be able to do that, which often is going to include giving them information in advance. So if we are going over documents like an eligibility document, an IEP document, we need to make every effort possible to give them that information in enough time that they have time to kind of digest it and be prepared with questions or things that they would like changed. It's not required anywhere. Some states do require that and they have a timeline for that. Utah does not, but we need to, give them it's like drinking from a fire hose, special ed and the things that we're sharing with families. So we need to make sure that they can understand it. We need to make sure we haven't predetermined everything. So anything you're sending home needs to say draft on it, not a final document, not here's the IEP, but we need to say over and over, this is a draft. It's a document. We can change at any time. We just wanted to have a starting point, blah, 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 whatever you want to say, but we need to do that. We need to consider all of their input. So if they show up to a meeting and they've got a report from a private speech and language pathologist that they would like to add, we have to consider all of that information in anything that we are doing. If they have recommendations from their child's therapist, if they have information from the tutor that they see after school, if they have anything like that, we need to consider that. We don't necessarily have to do it all, but we have to really look at it and weigh it and take it into account. And just so you know, failure to afford a parent meaningful participation can be considered a denial of FAPE, especially if what they wanted us to consider or what they wanted to say could have informed the FAPE that we provide. Then we can really have a problem if we are not allowing them to do that. So that's legal update number 1. The other thing I was looking at when I looked at the law conference is we're starting to see this trend in that if a student with a disability makes a report, or as you're investigating another incident that involves a student with a disability, their point of view is reported and it's not investigated, it can be considered discrimination, especially if we either dismiss the claim or if we punish a student and we haven't given them their due process rights. We have to be really careful with that. And in most of what I saw in the case law for this year, it was incidents in relation to bullying, harassment, aggression, things like that. There were a couple of cases where the principal dismissed the child's report because the child has a cognitive disability and so they deemed that it wasn't valid, or a student had difficulty relaying what had happened to them, or it didn't follow the correct timeline or sequence. And sometimes we have our kids with communication delays that struggle with that. We also may have students on the autism spectrum who may be reporting something and they're misreading the situation. But until we know that for sure, we need to take all of that very seriously. So just make sure that if kids with disabilities are reporting things to you, that you take that really seriously and make sure you investigate it and have sort of real information to support the outcome of that. This is a big one. This is a big one. So, eligibility. We're starting to see more and more prevalence of anxiety and depression, kids that can't come to school because of their anxiety, or kids that kind of fly under the radar because their behavior is all internalizing. So because they don't have incidences that we document, it can get kind of tricky to A, even notice that we may need to perform child find on these students, and B, it's a little bit trickier to document because it's happening internally and we maybe can't see that dysregulation the same way. And so we will assume and report that the child appears fine at school. This is one of those things that goes with parent participation. If kids are holding it together all day and then they go home and they're having anxiety attacks or whatever it is, and it's due to circumstances that are happening at school, they may require specialized instruction in order to mitigate that, in order to learn to self-advocate, in order to learn how to cope while they're with us, or accommodations that prevent those things from happening. So we need to kind of be a little more hyper aware of these students. We're always aware of the ones that are externalizers. and they tend to pull our focus, but just kind of maybe be checking in with teachers on their internalizing students. We also need to watch out for students that have really strong academics, but may be struggling with things like social skills, social communication, and the ability to build relationships. We're just starting to see more and more students who, you know, it may not be impacting their access to the general education curriculum, but it may be impacting their ability to participate because they can't connect with others, they can't build relationships with their peers, they can't participate in a group. Those kinds of things are a big deal. So we need to make sure that we don't dismiss those things just because kids have stellar academics or academics that are what we would consider fine. So there are disabilities where the impact is different. So just kind of make sure that you're paying attention to those things. So that's something that we need to work on. Okay, legal stuff done. See, this is what happens. Then I can't make it move forward. You think I can? No. Why did I stop share? I stopped share because I thought you might want to see my beautiful face, but I was probably wrong to do that. Okay, let's see. Oh, here's my favorite. Oh, wait. Look, I did it. I figured it out this time. Next time I stop sharing, I won't be able to figure it out. SPED and COVID, like serious damage report. Ugh, the fallout is brutal. Anyway, here's our non-existent federal guidance. Are you ready? They did tell us that we should prioritize the health and safety of children, students, and educators, and that should be our first consideration in any plans that we're making. But that the requirement to provide FAPE to students with disabilities has not been suspended or altered in any way. There have been no waivers. There was one waiver considered, but I don't know if it ever came through. Supposedly they're still talking about this, but whatever. We just need to let go of that and move forward. Providing FAPE to the best of our ability. So that's what we're going to talk about, is what does that mean? So what they're saying is that we can't use the difficulty of providing FAPE in the online environment as a reason not to provide it. We should be attempting and being really creative in how we provide FAPE. So schools have to make a good faith effort to serve their students with disabilities. And these are kind of how that's sort of loosely being defined. So if you're not sure, if you're making a good faith effort, like kind of look at what's going on and see if these 5 things are in play. And if maybe only one of them is, maybe we need to add a couple more. And if you have circumstances you want to talk through with me, please give me a call and let's do it. So we have to be diligent. We have to, our efforts need to be demonstrable. So we have to be able to show it in documentation, what we've been trying to do. They have to be affirmative, like we can't just passively hand stuff out and then we don't hear from parents and so that's the end. Like we need to actively be working to achieve compliance in providing FAPE. It needs to be fair, so we can't just decide, like one party can't just decide, well, we're gonna go against the directive of that order and just not provide something. Can't do that. And it has to be reasonable. So, you know, at the beginning of the dismissal, when we were all in red and we were in, you know, stay safe, stay healthy. I'm making up words now. We got requests from, not a lot of requests, but I got a few requests to send educators into homes or one-on-one paras or school nurses. And, you know, our answer to that was no, because it was in a violation of, the first consideration was to keep kids safe and healthy. And then this summer though, when we moved to orange, even in the original orange, not the new orange that we're in now, it says in the guidance that you can consider bringing in small groups of students to receive services. So we've been doing that in different spots around the district. Sometimes we have teachers doing it, sometimes we have paras doing it, but they are providing really small group services to kids with disabilities. It looks a little bit different in all the different places, which is going to play into how we do in-person services. And it's going very, very well. We haven't had to shut anything down. We've had one student that had to go home because he didn't feel well, but it turned out to just be a day of not feeling well, and it didn't turn into anything. So we have been able to run that for most of the summer. We've also continued to run online options in the summer for the parents that would have preferred that. We also learned this summer that people will kind of vacillate. So they'll say they want to come in person, and then when it's time to come in person, they'll be like, oh, I don't know, I want to change my mind, and things like that. And then some people who think they don't want to come in person, they're changing their minds later too, because we're amazing. So of course they want to see us in person. So we've been able to do that, and it has felt very safe, and it has felt very good. We haven't had any problems with masks or anything like that. And we've had some students who would traditionally be served in like a behavior setting doing it, and we've only had one student who didn't want to wear their mask, and it was because anyway, it was portrayed to the student that the teacher said, if you don't wear your mask, you can't come, and he didn't want to come anymore. So he refused to wear his mask so he could get out of work. But it wasn't about the mask, it was about the work. So anyway, we'll have some guidance for you on that too. That is going to be good stuff. So wait, hold on. Let's get to it. Look, I've done it again. Resume slideshow. Oh, I did it. Very good. All right, so let's start first with IEPs. So we tried really hard in the spring to hold IEP meetings whenever we could. So when we get back, though, we might have a small backlog. So these are some things to think about how we prioritize which students we should have meetings with. And you're going to read these, and then you're going to say, but Shelley, this is everybody. And it does feel like everybody, but I still think we will be able to kind of prioritize first, second, third. So these are just some things to think about. So students that have an obvious need, students that we didn't hear from at all during the closure, we should probably reach out to those families first and foremost. Students who experience severe regression, and we have a lot, that is going to take a while to recoup. Those students, we should probably be reviewing their IEPs stat, because their goals are probably remiss now, and we need to change them. If it's overdue, then we need to look at that. Or if a parent requests it, we need to consider doing that. When you're looking at the IEP, we need to look at, do we need to add services or change the services, add or change goals, accommodations to a student's IEP because of the impact of COVID? Has the student's needs changed? And what do they need to access FAPE, which, if you remember, is we're supporting their ability to access the general education curriculum. So if the delivery of the general education curriculum has changed vastly. So what does that mean for our kids? And a lot of them are going to need supports with executive functioning types of things, in particular in secondary. A lot of students reported that they needed support with time management. So we need to spend time doing that, and we need to add that to our services and our IEPs if we have students that need that understanding, or maybe they need some visual supports for how to access Canvas, or maybe they need shorter appointments every day that are a little more often than a block of time with you, just different things like that. We need to consider all of those things when we're writing IEPs this fall, or reviewing them and amending them. So here's what we're going to do with the in-person services. We're going to look at those. They need to be based on student need. That needs to be first and foremost, because you all know, some of you have some really vocal parents that are going to demand certain things that may not be relevant to the student's needs, but may be more relevant to the family's needs, or different things like that. So just remember to stay grounded in what the student needs. We're working on some documents. They're in they're being drafted now, and I'm just waiting to get final approval. Well, they're drafted. I'm waiting to get final approval before I can send them to you to help guide your planning and conversations with the teams at your schools and with families, so that it should walk you through kind of how to do this. So I kind of want to give you a context, because what we don't want to do is tell a parent that their child requires in-person services, because if they require in-person services and then we go to red, first, if we go backwards and we get back into stay home, stay safe, that is going to be problematic for us, because we've just set ourselves up to say that there's no other way to provide a student FAPE. And usually, you know, how we do it is not usually outlined in an IEP. I mean, it is a little bit, because there's all these assumptions in an IEP that we're in person. But, you know, like parents sometimes ask for certain curriculums or whatever, and we usually don't do that. We set the goal and we set the parameters, and then we get to decide how. So what we're doing is we are focusing on making sure that students benefit from their special education services. So our priority is students that have demonstrated that they struggled to benefit from those services, and to prevent further slide from being in the remote learning environment. But that doesn't mean that they can't access FAPE through online. It's just another option that we have for families, and we will prioritize who we offer that to first, based on some of the things that we're going to talk about. So just know that it's not, we're not going to tell parents your child requires these services. We're going to call them and we're going to say, you know, your child would benefit greatly from in-person services for part of their specialized instruction. It may not even be for all of their services. And we would like to offer that to you, blah, 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 and we'll go from there. But that's kind of how the context of that is going to work. These are the general steps. I've got more details, but like I said, I need to make sure I'm green lighted to give that to you before I give it to you. But we need to kind of gather the data we have on the student, you know, some of the stuff we learned in the spring. Did they engage at all? How much did they engage? Did they, you know, did we see any progress because of their engagement? Look at their current IEP. Do they have goals that just cannot be served in the online environment, or that are difficult, like social skills or, you know, OT, PT kinds of things, or, you know, kids that require heavy amounts of prompting or reinforcement, or they need really structured environments in order to learn. Those kinds of things are the things that we're looking for. And we need to look at the whole IEP and determine what the student would need in person the most, and we're going to start there. And then we will start looking at contacting families and talking to them about what they feel like their child needs and what they are comfortable with. Some parents are just going to tell us no to in-person services, and that's just fine. And some students will be so immunocompromised, it's not an option. And so then we will continue to work to find ways to serve them as the best that we can. We will, then this is the next, once we kind of have a list, and I can kind of give you an example, but once you know of the caseload of the kids that attend your school, you know, these are the kids that are, that we need to provide in-person services to, and these are the kids that are just going to stay fully remote. Then you're going to look at the resources that you have in your building. Now that's going to vary from building to building, and so I'm looking at you. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. I'm looking at you, principals that have one resource teacher. We're going to have to problem solve this a little bit differently, and it may include some cross-building sharing of different things. So don't panic as I talk about this. But once you know who you need to provide in-person services to, then I want you to look. You know, we've been talking for a couple of years now about putting all your kids in a pot and looking at your resources and then figuring out the best way to meet kids' needs. That's what we need you to do. So for example, in an elementary school that has essential elements, you have, I'm going to pretend that this is true. It's not true because our numbers are never this good, but let's pretend you have, you know, 3 classes and there's 10 kids in each class. Actually, that's worse than we have it right now, but so this is a bad example, but oh well. You have 30 kids and you have 3 FTE, and then those teachers also have paras, right? So you're gonna look, after talking to all of your parents in the school, then you've got, you know, let's say you have 10 kids that you think that want to come in for in-person services and 20 that want to remain remote. So then you might look at your 3 FTE and decide, but you know, and include them in all of this, right? And decide as a team who's going to do the in-person and who's going to do the online and the remote learning, because what we don't want to do is ask all of our special ed teachers to do 2 jobs. So we need to have, you know, you can make those adjustments within your teams of who's going to do what. And you need to think about the circumstances. So like, for example, in essential elements where kids require quite a bit of prompting and sometimes physical prompting, we may not be looking at bringing them in for a full day of school. We may be looking at individual one-on-one appointments, almost like going to the doctor. Or we might be looking at a small group in the morning and a small group in the afternoon so that you can keep the groups super small. And I'm gonna have guidelines for the groups and the different protocols that you need to follow to bring kids in. We have all of that for you. So you're going to like sit there and decide who's gonna work with who and in what circumstance. The other thing to think about is, let's say you only had 2 kids that wanted to come in person and 28 that are gonna stay remote. Maybe under the supervision of a teacher, you decide that you're going to have paras work with those kids. And then the teachers will be focused on the remote learning and the planning and those kinds of things. So it can look about a gazillion different ways. And we're going to run into bumpy situations and we'll problem solve them as they come up. But that is kind of what we need to do, is have each school look at their resources and kind of decide with the parameters we have set and what kids need, what that's going to look like. Some kids, you might decide only need an hour in a small group. Some kids may need a half day. Some kids may need like from 9 to 1. You have the latitude, we have the latitude and the flexibility to determine what kids need. And what that's going to look like. And we're going to also, next week, we're going to have for you like we're going to share our schedules from the summers, like some model schedules that you could consider. And you don't have to do things every day. You might have some kids that you decide need some support every day. You might have kids that could do every other day. There's a million things, which I know is sort of overwhelming, but I actually think it will be simpler than we think it's going to be once we sit down and start finding out who wants to do what. We are going to be able to provide the kids that have transportation on their IEP will still get transportation, and Cynthia is going to wait to route people until we give her lists, and we have until the 26th of August to give her lists. So that gives us some time to get everything together so that she can figure this out. So that's my little spiel about how to use your resources, and you can call me about that if you have questions, and that will be just great. Let's see. Once we have our plan, then we're going to need to communicate with parents, and we're going to have a little agreement for them to sign that just so that they understand the rules about, you know, face masks, and we're going to take temperatures, and the kids will wash their hands once they get to the school. If they ride the bus, they will take their temperature before they get on the bus. And if it's a certain whatever, they can't come, that kind of stuff. And we just want them to acknowledge, you know, the safety precautions that we are going to take. So then we got to, and it'll have on there a little place where you can indicate, you know, the days and times that their child is assigned to come. And then we need to document everything. We need to document who's coming to what services. That'll be another thing that's on that little plan. It will say what IEP goals we're going to address during those services. And so we just need to document everything, and the teachers need to take data on what happens during every single session of that. And so we gave them some sample ways to document in the spring, and we'll continue using those. as we move through the fall. And then always review and reassess. So what happened in the summer is we had some kids that came and then their parents said, never mind. And then we had some kids who felt like needed more. So we added a day. We had one student coming in only for an hour a day, but he had one-on-one, and things like that. And so we can make adjustments as we go. And we'll see what happens over time. When we get to midterm, you know, if we haven't met our metric and we are going to stay in the remote learning environment, then we might make some adjustments at that time that also might have to be readjusted if we do move into hybrid, because then you will have more people in the building. So we'll have to figure all of that out then, which will be super fun. I want you to consider a wide variety of options. You know, we'll talk your teachers through with all of this too. So they might decide to do one-on-one with their students depending on what's going on. We can do really small groups. We may decide to support certain services, but not necessarily every single one of them. Many students will have a hybrid of online and in-person services. And this is a big one, and I've talked about it already, but I'm going to talk about it again. We need to provide support for when the students are accessing their gen ed portion of their online learning. So they might come in for an hour of reading help or an hour of math help, and then for 30 minutes, we might log those students into their Canvas and help them see, what are you missing? Let's modify this, blah, that kind of stuff. We need to really provide, that is the biggest thing we've heard from parents of students with disabilities, besides those who can't access any of it. We've heard that their kids were just lost when it came to knowing how to do this and how to organize it. And so I think that's a really important service that we need to provide. Okay, this is everyone's favorite subject, including mine, compensatory services. So this was something I hadn't really thought about until the law conference, but there is a difference between compensatory ed and compensatory services. Compensatory ed is a remedy for when a district fails to provide FAPE. Now, if we've made our good faith effort to provide FAPE and it was reasonable, then likely we would not be found needing to provide compensatory ed. And the lawyer that did this presentation actually recommended that we not call these compensatory services, but we call them something else, like additional services, COVID impact services, things like that. That's like, we just called our summer services this summer. We didn't call them anything else. Because this is different than when a district gets in trouble for denial of FAPE and has to provide compensatory ed to a family or a student. This is, we need to do something about the impact of COVID. So she points out that in the Andrew F. the new standard for FAPE, that a school must offer an IEP reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. And she pointed out that the child's circumstances right now include the impact of COVID and include the impact of emergency schooling and different things like that. And so all of that would likely be taken into consideration by the courts. And as long as we can demonstrate a good faith effort, we will be fine. So that impact of COVID is part of their circumstances. So we need to focus on any additional services. And some of that we may start providing now. If we have a student who gets 30 minutes for math and we realize they need that support with the executive functioning, we are going to add that now and provide it. We don't have to wait necessarily if we see a need for services right now, because those are the child's current circumstances. There's not a lot of guidance for when we're going to provide makeup services, but all of the guidance talks about that we need to assess students' needs when schools return to normal operation. So that says to me that we're not going to be making those determinations right now because we're not in normal operation. And that once we are, we will look at adding additional services beyond what's happening in the typical day at that time. But since we're not having the typical day, we won't need to. So this has all been really hard. And I am up and down and all around about the whole thing, like 100%. And right now, because I just come back from vacation, I'm in a pretty good spot because I sat on the Oregon coast and tried to let my COVID woes wash out with the waves. And here's the thing, it is what it is, and we're just going to do the best we can. And we are problem solvers. That is what we do. And so we're just going to solve the problems as they come, one problem at a time. And the hardest part about this is I like to try and anticipate problems, to put things in place to fix those. And it's hard to anticipate problems right now. And it's hard to anticipate people's feelings. I've been kind of surprised a few times from lots of different people. So, you know, staff in the district and parents by their reactions to different things, different announcements, to the being online versus being in person all the time. So I'm sure you've had that feeling too. And every once in a while, I'm kind of surprised by my own reaction. I'm not going to lie. So my friends at Totem, whom I adore, who do Happy Class in Aspen, have put together what they call the COVID Compendium. And I will be getting that out to all of my special ed teachers, and I will provide you with a copy because there's some really good things in there. But this one was my favorite, so I wanted to share it with you. So here it comes. Look out, I'm getting so good. So Dr. Christian Saby, who actually worked in our district once upon a time, he was one of the original behavior specialists with the lovely Miriam Bales. He does a section on about teachers taking care of themselves. And one of the things that he works on is some exercises with them on psychological flexibility. So this comes from that. And psychological flexibility is defined as the ability to experience life as it is while still acting consistent with what we value. And he uses this quote from Bruce Lee, which frankly, I have never heard. I'm not a huge Bruce Lee person, but I might be now after reading this quote. He says this: we must be shapeless, formless, like water. When we pour water in a cup, it becomes the cup. When we pour water in a bottle, it becomes the bottle. When we pour water in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Water can drip and it can crash. Become like water, my friend. And Christian's comment after that is, we will be metaphorically poured into a number of uncomfortable situations this year. If we resist them, we will spend a lot of energy with little result. If we accept the situation and flow with it, we will find new and useful ways to respond to the experience. So I wanted to end with that because it is my goal to become water this fall, to accept the situations in which I find myself and our students, and the families, and attempt to accept those situations and work to solve those instead of fighting against those situations or wringing my hands in dismay or raising my hands to the sky in anger. And because I've just been on the Oregon coast, the metaphor of water really spoke to me, and the different ways that it does drip or crash. And really, it's a powerful substance if you think about it, all of the things that it's done to the topography of our planet and the life that it brings. So there's no one I'd rather be water with than all of you. I am forever grateful for the things that you do for me personally and for our students with disabilities. And I believe that we can wade our way through this and figure out what we need to do and provide kids with really awesome online and in-person services. So we're working really hard to make sure that happens. So thank you for attending my second TED Talk, or maybe your first TED Talk, even though it's not really a TED Talk. And please call me if you have any questions or concerns. I would much rather answer lots of questions than have to help you dig out of a really hard situation. So we'd rather do that up front. So anyway, I will see you later. It's a bummer that I don't get to see you now because that's one of my favorite parts of Admin Institute, but that it is what it is. So I will see you later and have a great time.